Está online?
Está. Consulta do doutor Irad, que eu em descanso.
Fala-se inglês. Good morning, everybody. Let me start by saying hello to our dean and director, Mr. Irad, who kindly has joined us to attend this special lecture. The director of our department and both of the persons happy faculty, and our coordinator of our research center, Professor Carmen Suarez, who is deeply responsible for us to have here with us Professor Irad Malkin. And now Professor Irad Malkin, who has been with us for some weeks and still for some weeks to go, so until December, we will have the pleasure of having, in fact, 10 special moments with Professor Irad Malkin, 9 lectures and 1 intensive course. So well, this is the fifth one, so we are right on the middle. And I mean, you probably already know all Professor Irad Malkin, but just me let to add a couple of details for those who perhaps are here for the first time or are following us online. This lecture, the lecture of today, is included in a special event which is called the Coimbra Global Lectures. Which were started precisely this year in April, with the ambassador from Greece, Professor Dr. Vasilis Papadopoulos, who inaugurated. And so you are our second speaker, and it's a great pleasure for us to have you in this stance as well. So Professor Irad Malkin is a visiting professor in this special program of the foundation, the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation, so the visiting professor of humanities. It is the first round of this program, which was started last year. The application was made last year. It was a very competitive program with more than 100 applicants, and only 3 were selected, with our Professor Irad Malkin on top of them. So it's a great honor and a pleasure for us to receive him. So he's a very well-known scholar and with an extremely international publications. I will just remember here some of his books, more impacting books, and in the areas he is been working. So he's co-founder and co-editor of the Mediterranean Historical Review, and his research covers, a lot of important and very impacting topics like colonization, religion, myth, ethnicity, network theory, and institution of drawing of lots. And I shall speak a little bit more about the last one. Aside from edit books, he is the author of Religion and Colonization in Ancient Greece, Myth and Territory in the Spartan Mediterranean, The Returns of Odysseus, Colonization and Ethnicity, Ethnicity and Identity in Ancient Greece, A Small Greek World, Networks in the Ancient Mediterranean, and all or most of those books have been translated into different languages. So you can, which is a clear sign of the impact and of wide impact of this kind of research that has been developed by Professor Irad Malkin. And his latest book, I think it's the latest one, at least it was published perhaps 2 or 3 weeks ago, which is precisely Drawing Lots from Egalitarianism to Democracy in Ancient Greece. It's a book co-authored with Justin Bloch. In fact, 3 parts of it were written by Professor Irad Malkin and 1 part by Professor Justin Bloch. I have just started to read the book, so I cannot talk about the whole book, but it's really, amazing, and it's a small print of the book, so it was published by Oxford University Press, and it's very interesting the way Professor Irad Malkin and Justin Bloch explored the idea of what they call the mindset of egalitarianism in ancient Greece, which we usually think about egalitarianism and the election by lot connected to ancient democracy in Athens, but they prove on any doubt that it started much sooner than this. And first examples they discuss is from Rome from 8th century and go, of course, until the Hellenistic period. So it's something very distinctive and affects all the areas of the activity of the Greeks. And among those areas, of course, the topic of today's lecture, which is on Delphi and Apollo. And so I'm very curious about not only what will be said about this important center, but how, in fact, lot can be understood, especially in those two centers like Delphi and Dodona, where precisely the consultation of oracles was very important. Thank you very much for being here. So we will have the lecture, and at the end, some 10-15 minutes for discussion. So please, for those that are following us online or here, keep your notes, and at the end we will be able to discuss with Professor Malkin. The floor is now yours. Sorry? Yeah, you can start. It's already here.
We can have more lights, I think. Otherwise, people fall asleep. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. And you hear me?
Yes. Let's put this in presentation mode.
What's that?
It's here. So you click here. Not this one. This one. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not going there now. I'm going to something else. No, I don't want this. I want this. Okay, very good. No, it's not showing on the screen. Eulalia, it's not showing on the screen. It's not sharing the screen.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you so much for this very generous, both specific introduction and a general invitation to your wonderful university with its centuries-old reputation, and to be especially in the context of classical studies in this university, I find enriching and invigorating. And today I will speak about Apollo and Delphi, or Delphi and Apollo. You'll see the emphasis shifting throughout the lecture. And my purpose is, first of all, I assume some of you are not initiated deeply in the study of ancient Greek religion. I will try to be a little more general, talk about Apollo, talk about the nature of Greek divinities, talk specifically about the mythology of Apollo, and in the second part, I will try to present some of my own original research concerning the Delphic oracle, but to emphasize a specific aspect of the Delphic oracle, which is usually far less known. So, well, who's Apollo? Apollo is a young god. He's well, I guess this is not going to work too well, huh? Because it's what? Usually he's represented without a beard. And if you look at Greek statues or Greek coins or any Greek painting, a god without a beard is a young god. He hasn't matured yet to have a beard. And so, but that's an important point because it puts Apollo on the same, more or less, level of all those young Greek men, usually, who were setting out to colonize and settle overseas. So he's always beardless, and since Greek religion, let's remember that, Greek religion was not a dogmatic religion. Namely, it wasn't a single dogma. So you have a variety of versions about Delphi, about the birth of Apollo, and nobody saw the contradiction as problematic. Unlike monotheistic religions, where you always have to find excuses or find exegesis to round out the contradictions. Contradictions there were, And so the story of the birth of Apollo and the Oracle of Delphi has a variety of versions and attitudes in ancient Greek religion. And the fundamental text that we often turn to is the Homeric hymn to Apollo. This is a composition probably of the 6th century BC. And it recounts two tales. I mean, the framework is the birth and life of Apollo, and his birth in the island of Delos, which became sacred to Apollo and the center for a Pan-Ionian festival of Apollo, and the establishment of the oracle at Delphi, not at Delos, which will provide us with the unique version of how Apollo and Delphi are connected. So the hymn, the Homeric hymns were believed to have been written by Homer, by ancient Greeks. They were not. Anything was. And the poet, the first few minutes I will dedicate to the text itself and try to illustrate to you, stemming from the text, the mythology of Apollo and Delphi. And the poet opens by telling of how young Apollo enters the halls of Olympus, which I will not go into much. And then the poet has a kind of a dialogue. He's asking the goddess a question. And she said, shall it be, namely my story, how in the beginning Leto bore you for mortals' delight, leaning against Cynthius mountain on a rocky island, Sigurd Delos, while on both sides the dark waves came up on the shores under the keening winds. This is just to illustrate the kind of style that we're talking about, namely the birth of Apollo. Now, Leto was the mother of Apollo, and Apollo was the son of Zeus. But Leto was not the wife of Zeus. Hera was the wife of Zeus. And so it took her 9 days in labor to find a place that will be willing for her to give birth. She was suffering terribly. The jealousy of Hera was frightening to anybody, but the island of Delos, rocky place without agriculture, without fields, had very little to lose. And so it was Leto who more or less agreed to that. And then there's an interesting dialogue inside this poem where there's a negotiation between the island and the mother, Leto. And in this negotiation, Delos demands to be a famous center of Apollo, sacred sanctuary, and all this. And he wants to the following. Now, this is Delos speaking, as it were. But suppose you could bring yourself, goddess, to swear a powerful oath that this will be the first place he makes his beautiful temple to be an oracular sight for men. And then only after that, he will go all over the world. So Delos has an inferiority complex as an island, yeah? And he's afraid that once Apollo will see its terrible, miserable poverty, it will kick it down into the bottom of the ocean for it to become only the home for seals and fish. So Leto basically, and this is already a point which I at least noticed that hasn't been not too much attention has been paid to. Delos wants to be an oracle. Leto doesn't give him that. Leto says, yes, you will be a center, many people will come, they will sacrifice lots of bulls, etc. But an oracle, she's silent about this, because this explains the second part of the hymn, where Delphi becomes the center for Apollo. And so the word for oracle in Greek is chesterion. And this is, again, the theme is repeated time and again, to search a place for humankind. Eventually, the place chosen, although this is not mentioned in the hymn, as the center of the world, Delphi. There's a legend in which Zeus sent 2 eagles flying over the sky, and where they met, this is the omphalos, the navel, the center of the earth, and Delphi was believed to have been precisely that. But the thing is, he has to search for a place, which is an interesting point, because he can demand whatever he wants. And first he encounters, when he reaches Delphi, finally, the mountains of Delphi, around it, a monster And he says, and the words are important, "Here I am minded to make my beautiful temple as an oracle for humankind, who will ever come in crowds bringing me perfect hecatombs." Now, what are hecatombs? Hecatombs are supposedly a sacrifice of 100 bulls, but it's a symbolic number. Nobody really sacrificed 100 bulls, but a huge sacrifice, that's what it meant. And then he goes on to give you a geographical perspective of who will come. People from the Peloponnesos, namely from southern Greece, and people from the mainland of Greece, which shows you how early really the reference is, because by this time, the 6th century, Greeks were living in the Black Sea, in southern France, in Libya, and so on, but he doesn't mention that. Although Delphi itself is responsible for giving foundation oracles precisely to all those Greeks who settled in the Black Sea, in the Western Mediterranean, in those islands. So the hymn is trying to present itself as if it is primordial and very ancient, before the Greek geography has changed so much, which it did, not least thanks to Delphi itself. Now, the entire hymn, I've written an article about it once, is, since Apollo was the god of colonization, the god of founding new cities, since the basic scheme was for a founder, an oikistes, to come to Delphi and receive a personal appointment from Apollo as a founder, and with religious duties delegated to him by the god. And so what Apollo does in the hymn, anyway, that's what I claim, is founding a colony. I mean, it's not called a colony, it's called a sanctuary and oracle, but all the steps, and you will see some of them, are precisely those of the foundation of a new place. This is the framework in which Greeks thought of Apollo as the most political of all Greek gods, and political in the sense that he establishes human societies, and he's a founder. He's Apollo Archegetes, which is his official title as a god of colonization. So saying, Phoebus Apollo laid out his foundations in broad and very long unbroken lines. And this, and in ancient hymns, sometimes the same sentences reappear, and it is repeated again. But the point is of a foundation. He's laying out the foundation. Later on, others will add the temple. Now, you should know one thing. Greek religion had sanctuaries. It didn't have to have temples. It's a different thing. A temple is the naos, is the house, is the dwelling place of the god. The sanctuary, the sacred precincts, all you needed for ancient Greek ritual was an altar and an enclosed or differentiated sacred precinct. Whether to have a temple or not have a temple, that depended on the circumstances. The temple usually housed the image of the god, if any. So the word temple for us, we always have this image of nice columns and buildings, but this is the last thing you need on a sacred precinct for Greek worship. So laying out the foundation is the essential thing in this case. Now Apollo is he's in need of priests, right? So he's observing and seeing a ship full of Cretan merchants and sailors, and he basically hijacks the ship. In the form of a dolphin, he jumps on board the ship, and then without their ability to maneuver it, they're sailing all the way and eventually reach the Bay of Itea, namely of Delphi. And he is forcing them to become his caste of priests forever. And then this is very unique in Greek religion, because often it's a religion, as I said, without dogma. It has no sacred books. It doesn't have a caste of priests like the Brahmins or the ancient Hebrew Levites that sort of stand between human beings and the god. And this doesn't exist. So it's a far more open-ended religion in that sense. The fact that the entire population of Delphi was dedicated to running that institution makes it a very, very special case. Okay? And they were not considered different human beings or a different class, but we'll come back to how they were even selected and how they were even chosen. So Apollo comes with the ship to the shore. He places the Cretans on the beach. He hops over to the temple that he had already laid the foundation of, and he lights a fire. Now, lighting a fire is the significant point, symbolizing foundation. Because when Greek colonists, for example, set out overseas, they would take fire from the perpetual, eternal fire in their public common house and light with it a new fire in the new common house or political house in the new city, symbolizing the connection between the two. But lighting the fire itself is an act of, I'm here to stay. And there's various episodes in which Greeks come, light the fire, and people come, what are you doing? Why are you lighting a fire? I mean, it's not a self-evident question. It's not because they wanted to barbecue something. It's because they wanted to establish themselves. And that's another sign of the aspect of foundation that we have here. For I am Zeus's son, he says. I declare myself Apollo, and I brought you here over the mighty main, not with any ill intent, but you are to occupy my rich temple here, which is greatly honored by all men, and you shall know the gods' intentions. By their will you shall be held in honor for all times. And he built an altar on the seashore. Sorry, he tells them, and build an altar on the seashore, light the fire on it, offer white barley groats on it, and then stand around the altar and pray. Even as I originally leapt onto your ship in the misty sea in the form of a dolphin, so you are to pray to me as a dolphin god. Okay? So Greeks' popular etymology saw Delphi as the site of the delphine of the dolphin. Okay, and I will not get into that symbolism now, but he tells them to first build an altar on the beach. Delphi, if you've ever been there, anybody's been to Delphi here? It's way up there, right, in Mount Parnassus. So why are they lighting fire on the beach? Because Apollo, you'll be surprised, is the god Embasios and Ekbasios, which means a god of boarding a ship and disembarking from a ship. That's one of his functions. Into a ship and out of a ship. Once you get out of the ship, in a new land, you light a fire and pray and sacrifice to Apollo Ekbasios, the Apollo of disembarkation from ships. And this is precisely what is happening here. They're coming with the ship, and this is what they were doing. And then everybody goes to a procession to Delphi, and everybody's very happy. So you see here the foundation of Delphi as an oracle. But you have to understand that Delphi was not just an oracle. It was a double institution. I'll come back to that point, because it was also the site of Pan-Hellenic games, the Pythian games, like the Olympian games. They were as important as Olympia, and they took place every 4 years, usually 1 year after the Olympic Games. Okay, so Delphi was a double institution, a site of Pan-Hellenic games coming over, and a site of an oracle, and the two overlap, but they're not always the same. Now, there's a totally different version of the foundation of the Delphic oracle. It's provided by Aeschylus in his prologue to his play, the Eumenides, and let's see the kind of contrast that we've got here. Eumenides takes place in front of Delphi. Okay, the first in this prayer of mine. Now this is Aeschylus now. Okay, this is not the American. I give the place of highest honor among the gods to the first prophet Earth, Gaia, and after her Deutera to Themis, for she was the second to take this oracular seat of mother, as legend tells. And in the third allotment, with Themis' consent and not by force, another Titan, child of Earth, Phoebe, took her seat there. She gave it as a birthday gift to Phoebus, who has his name from Phoebe. Phoebus is Phoebus Apollo. It's simply Apollo. So here we have a completely different set. There was an oracle of Gaia, of Mother Earth, which was then taken over by Themis, who she was, I'll say in a few minutes. And then by the third allotment, and the verb is lanchano in Greek, which signifies drawing lots. By the lot, in fact, it's as if the oracle was moving from hand to hand by lot. Okay, and the final recipient of the lot is this deity called Phoebe, who is who gives it to Phoebus as a gift, and that is why Phoebus Apollo is the owner of the Delphic oracle. So he's not the first, he's not the second, he's not even the third, he's the fourth one, and he's not given it in terms of what he deserves. It's 3 allotments, and then he gets the oracle, and which is an interesting point. All these changes and so on. Now, why that is important, this will be in the second part of the talk. So what is a god? I'm asking this question. What is a god? I'm sure I will get very different answers if I really ask each and every one of you. But what is a Greek god? What is an ancient Greek god? It's not a simple answer, because we usually think of Greek gods from the time we were reading popular versions of Greek mythology as children, or being told the myths in simplified form. This is something that Greeks have been doing since antiquity, because Plato says that nannies are the first persons responsible for acquainting little children with Homer. They don't read Homer, they hear the stories. So, but a Greek god is not a person. We should not think of Greek gods as personalities. That often portrays, and because in art they have a human form, they somehow seem familiar, but they're not. The gods, there's not even a good English word for that. There are puissance in French. You translate it as powers, but that's as close as you can get. But they're entities that are forces in some sense, and they're systems, basically. That is why Apollo can be the god of music, the god of prophecy, and the god of getting off a ship at the same time. You don't think those things are connected, perhaps they're not, but in terms of how Greeks perceive their divinities, it's an agglomeration of qualities that somehow, by the form of poetic presentation, you see them as human beings, but they're not. We say that Greek gods are like human beings, but they often in poetry, since Homer on, whenever they appear for humans, they change to get a human form. We never hear about the original form. Apparently there isn't any, which is an interesting point in and of itself. So Apollo is the healer, the god of medicine also, of music, of prophecy, maritime functions. He's Apollo Archegetes, the leader of colonial foundations overseas. So he's not a personality. How old is Apollo? How old, I mean, that's an historian's question, not how old the god really is. But since when is Apollo active in the Greek world? Because in the various divinities that we do find in Linear B tablets from the 2nd millennium BC, there are some surprising names of Greek gods, in fact, that show that there was a continuity since the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, from 2nd millennium to the 1st, of a lot of the Greek divinities. And this could only be clear after the decipherment of Linear B about 75 years ago. Now, the point is that there is no Apollo, at least you should always be careful of arguments from silence. The fact that we didn't find it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We didn't find it. But there are there's a big corpus of tablets from the 2nd millennium BC, and some of the gods, like Elethea, the goddess of giving birth, whom we just hardly met at the Homeric hymn when Leto was giving birth to Apollo, there's a god called Payawon, okay? And the Payan is the hymn used to be sung to Apollo, and in wartime also. In fact, the Cretan priests at the end, when they march up to Delphi, this is what they're singing. So this may have been Apollo, or maybe not. We don't know. So we first encountered the name much earlier. And everybody was sure that Dionysus is the late god, but in fact Dionysus does appear in Linear B before that. And it's important because you should know that at Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, Apollo was there only 9 months a year. Then he would take a vacation, go to the lands of the Hyperboreans above the north, and Dionysus will take over Delphi. So it's important here. Now, the next question is, after what is a god, what is an oracle? Well, an oracle with a, say, capital O is the institution where you go to get prophecies. But the oracle as a prophecy, well, here is something fundamental, and excuse me if I'm saying something very basic here, the difference between revealed religion and polytheistic religions. And that's very important to note, to understand Apollo. Namely, in a revealed religion, and I'm being very simplistic here, so please excuse me if I'm stepping on some sensitivities. In a revealed religion, there's a moment when the word of God goes through a prophet. That's what's called revealed. Okay? The word of God is revealed to a person. It gets finally textualized and frozen. Okay? And ever since, we write more text, but always the earlier texts are supposedly more significant for us. And there's a lot of exegesis, namely interpretation of those texts, which you find also in Judaism, certainly in Christianity. And unless you yourself are a prophet, the Mormon religion is a recent modern example of that, you don't expect anybody in this room to become a prophet. And if they do, they usually end up in an asylum. So the point is to look at the religion in a completely different way. This is a Greek religion where the world is full of gods, as the philosopher Thales said, but it doesn't mean that we know who they are. We need a mediator, an exegetes, an exegetes who will expound to us the knowledge about the gods. And this is exactly what the function of Apollo. In contrast to revealed religions, when you have in Greek religion, there's a constant dialogue with the divinity. You can go to Delphi and ask a question, which you cannot really do in a monotheistic exclusive religion. And also, now to say something about polytheism, if the world is full of gods, it means that there are no false gods. It doesn't exist. There's no truth, because my Zeus is your Amun-Ra in Egypt. You call him with a different name, but it doesn't mean that it's not the same puissance, the same force, the same God. So whatever we know about the gods is an approximation. It's a doxa, as the sophists used to say. It's not episteme, it's not knowledge about the god. But Apollo does have knowledge. And that is why so many of the questions addressed to the oracles concern ritual. To whom God shall I do this or that in order that this or that will happen? Okay? So Apollo tells you. And sometimes it's boring to look through all those lists of cults and names, but this was what's significant to many Greeks. So we got here a dialogue, we have a constant interpretation, and I said that most of the questions are ritual questions. For example, I'll take just one of those examples. Cleomenes, the Spartan king, was making war against Argos, and he had an oracle saying that he will capture Argos, and then Cleomenes captured a small shrine of a hero called Argos, and he realized that this is the fulfillment of the prophecy, and he could not conquer the actual city of Argos. So there was a ritual, or the Phocians tried to colonize Corsica, Kyrnos in ancient Greek. They failed, and the Delphic oracle said, I didn't mean the island, I meant the hero called Kyrnos. And so this is a kind of Delphic apology that is quite common, but it means that people took the words of the prophecy seriously. Otherwise, there's been no need for an apology. So Apollo was a political god. This is a great finding of Walter Burkert, the great historian of Greek religion, because he noticed that in the Dorian dialects of ancient Greek, you call Apollo Apollon, not Apollo, but Apello. And the name of an assembly, a political assembly, say in Sparta, for example, was Apella. So Apollo is the god of human society and human order. He's the god, he's the political god. Okay. But he's also, as I said, archegetes. When colonizing Sicily, the very first Greeks to have arrived there set up an altar on the beach, exactly like the one I mentioned before in the Homeric hymn to Apollo. And it was an altar and a separate shrine. There was a shrine to Apollo Archegetes, Apollo the god of colonization. And because it was such a distinct shrine, it was common to any Greek who later arrived to Sicily. And there were about 20 to 30 different Greek settlements in Sicily eventually, but each and every one of them regarded that specific altar on the beach as common to everyone. Greeks in Sicily developed their identity of Sikeliotai. They were very different from each other. They spoke different dialects and so on, but they were all Greeks in Sicily, Sikeliotai. And the common article, the common altar was the altar of Apollo Archegetes. And every 4 years, when there were the Pythian Games in Delphi, delegates from all of Sicily would congregate in the city of Naxos, today Taormina, which is above in the mountains, and go to the shrine of Apollo Archegetes and set out from there. So it's a point of convergence and contacts among various Greeks. And of course, providing further force to the notion of Hellenic identity, the different kind of identity that is common geographically to the region and expressed religiously by the altar to Apollo Archegetes en route to the Pythian Games in Delphi. I should perhaps say, I said in another lecture, there was an institution called Theoria, namely every 4 years, delegates from Delphi would go to 3 directions, to the north, to the east, and to the west, and announce the sacred truce among Greeks, and tell everyone that in a month's time or whatever, the Pythian Games will start. So Delphi is at the center, is a hub of a pan-Hellenic network that sends its connections all over the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, and the Pythian Games were in fact very, very, very prestigious. So Greeks from all over would come. The Pan-Hellenism of Delphi is expressed also at the site itself. Let's see if it's going to work now. This is a French reconstruction. You should know that the French has bought the entire village of Castries in the 19th century, and after an earthquake, and built a new village for them. And then until today, the entire mountain belongs to the French. Yeah. When I was much younger, I participated in the 200th anniversary of excavating Delphi. So, and it goes on still. It's a huge site. And this is a reconstruction of the sacred road to Delphi. And because each Greek city, wealthy enough, like Massalia in southern France, Marseille, would build a treasury house in Delphi. And this is an example of the Athenian treasury, which is like a temple, but it's not. It's small. It has only 2 columns, and it works basically as a safe deposit, because this is where you put all the expensive dedications that are usually locked throughout the year, and they're opened up during great events like the Pythian Games, because it's a prestige. Greeks would come and see the types of wonderful dedications that Athens gave to Apollo, and it's in this kind of place. Okay, it's working fine. Good. Now, how do you get a prophecy in Delphi? The popular image is that of the Pythia, a woman, usually about 50 years old. That's how she's chosen. She's almost like a parapsychological medium. The god enters into her and she prophesies. So the words that come out of her mouth are Apollo's words. The verb is enthusiasmos, from which the English word enthusiasm comes, namely, literally, the god enters into you. So the Pythia is not responsible for the word she's saying, supposedly. Okay. So in Greek society, as I say here, as in many others, inspired prophecy had a much higher reputation than kleromancy. Kleromancy is divination by lot. It's a very popular thing that exists throughout the world today. Divination by, you can turn off a cup of coffee and look at the pattern and divine something. You can throw dice, you can throw bones, knuckle bones. There are various ways for divination. And the technical word comes from kleros, namely lot in Greek, okay? And mantea, namely prophecy, I suppose, okay? So inspired prophecy is considered to be the highest form of prophecy. And we will see later how Greeks related to divination by lot, as we see. Example, many are the dice throwers, trioboloi, but few are the prophets, was a popular Greek maxim. Which is nice, right? Diviners are a dime a dozen, but real prophets, inspired prophets, are so few and rare. And this is my point about being inspired, enthusiasmos, which you can now see on the screen. Okay? So, how was the Pythia chosen? One of our best sources for Delphi is a man called Plutarch, who lived in the 2nd century AD, the beginning. He was a very learned Greek. We know him mainly because of his huge corpus of biographies that came down to us. But aside from that, he never stopped writing. If you look today in the library, you'll see volumes and volumes and volumes of Plutarch. Many of them are short essays under the head of Moralia. That's how they're called for some reason. And he had spent the last 25 years of his life as a priest in Delphi. So he knew very well. And he had access to information and traditions that, of course, we do not have. So when he's saying something about Delphi, we should really pay attention. And he has specific essays about prophecy, about the Pythia, and so on. So it's a rather important term. But he doesn't tell us exactly how she was chosen. Rather, in the play by Euripides, Ion, we are told, prophet of Phoebus, this is the Pythia herself. prophet of Phoebus, preserving the ancient law of the tripod, selected from all Delphic women. So far it doesn't mean too much, but the relevant verb is exaireo, meaning to choose by lot or to select. But the Delphi, as we'll see, it has specific connotations for prophecy using lots. Inspired prophecies and divination by lot express a mental attitude and constitute a social institution coherently included in the entire body of social thought. And Jean-Pierre Vernant, the great French scholar of ancient mythology and religion, says that divination is an official instance of legitimation, that at a time when choices are fraught with consequences for group equilibrium, offers decisions that are socially objective, that is, independent of the desires of the parties at issue, and benefiting from a general consensus of the social body that puts this type of response above dispute. This is a form of arbitration, if you wish, that doesn't exist in modern societies. But think how efficient that is when you are in a dilemma, true dilemma, which you cannot solve, and you always resent the person making the decision because there's always another side to it. But if it is the God, if you defer it, if you outsource it, as it were, it helps social cohesion and reduce tensions and resentments within a society. So that is quite significant. It is outsourcing the decision at Delphi. So, associated with the sacred tripod, the Pythia would sit on a tripod, namely a three-legged sort of ball. There'll be a picture in a minute, you'll see that. So supposedly, she's sitting on a tripod and holding a fiale, namely a sort of a wide cup in her hands, and she's looking at it. And why does she do that? Maybe to observe and pick up the lots. We don't know exactly. It's quite clear that they were using lots in Delphi. We'll see in a minute how. But it's not clear whether they were used as a preliminary inquiry before you approach the Pythia or not. So we just can't be sure about this. Conversely, we should remember that the Pythia was active in Delphi 1 day a month, 9 months a year. That's it. In fact, originally 1 day a year. By the time of Plutarch, there were 3 Pythias running in rotation because there was so much demand for that. But the question is significant because we hear a lot about people coming to Delphi and asking questions. And then, what about accessibility? How can you do that? And usually you should know that the promanteia, namely the right to consult the Pythia, was determined by lot. We'll see that in a minute. But it was usually the first priority was for the state inquiries, not for private inquiries. Okay, so when Xenophon, for example, comes to Delphi and asks, is there anybody wiser than Socrates? And he gets the answer, no, there isn't. I assume it was by a lot oracle. Usually questions of yes or no are very easily determined by lots, like throwing a coin, right? Whereas more open-ended questions like, to which country shall I go to found a new colony? You need an answer, which is not yes or no. You need an answer. So there's a big difference here, and often we just don't know, because when we hear that the god said yes, it could have been a lot oracle. I didn't prepare this, but at the oracle of Dodona, since you mentioned it before, which is an oracle of Zeus in northwestern Greece, until today they discovered 1,400 questions to the god on tin foils, written by individual hands, so Greeks could read and write, unlike the medieval period, asking questions like, is he really my son? For example, answer yes or no. Okay, I don't know. So this is the type of question that you get. Also, notice one of the reasons I do think that the Pythia was using lot is because of the Greek word to prophesy, anhairein, which literally means to pick up. What do you pick up? And this convinced Robert Parker, the greatest scholar of Greek religion living today, I think, that this is in fact the case. You should note also, interestingly, the ancient Latin etymology of sos, also means lot, implies to come out. Think of sortiri, for example, or sorcery in present-day English, which comes from lottery. Okay? So, in spite of the sheer disregard for drawing lots by scholarship in general, you see it's imbued even in the language. In the 10th century AD, there was a Byzantine learned dictionary or kind of encyclopedia, and they had much more, huge quantity of sources that we don't have anymore. And he says, near the city, Delphi, was a temple of Apollo called Pytho. In this, a brazen tripod was set up, and above this was a basin which held the prophetic lots. Whenever those who were consulting the oracle asked a question, some were drawn out, and the Pythia, employing them or becoming possessed, declared that which Apollo revealed. It's a kind of a summary, 10th century AD summary, and that is why it has problems, because he regards the Pythia both as an inspired prophetess, enthusiasmos, and becoming possessed. Or so the author, he connects the drawing of lots and prophetic possession as one and the same thing. Is it? I think I have a better picture here. Oh, by the way, this is the cover of the book mentioned before, just coming out. And this is an image of Themis as the prototype of the Pythia, seated on the Delphic tripod, consulted by Aegeus. It's an Attic red figure vase attributed to Codrus painter about 430 BCE. So what is she looking at? Now, already in 1916, E. Robbins has written an article trying to convince that she's actually looking at lots. Other people were speculating maybe it's water, she's looking at the reflection of water, and many possibilities. But if you look at all the evidence together, which I can't do today, you do realize that some lots are involved. And why Themis? As we heard before from Aeschylus, she was one of the possessors of the oracle, right? She was worshipped as a goddess in other places. Now, remember I said before about Greek precincts, sacred precincts, with an altar. In each one, you could have more than one divinity worshipped. For example, in the great precinct of Apollo at Delos, the sacred island, was another cult to a hero called Anios, who was a local hero. In Delphi, you had Athena, you had Gaia. So the point is that the sacred precinct is what's important, and within it, you create an order of priorities to worship. Themis, in the Greek sense of what is established, and the related verb is tithemi, to lay down, to establish. That is why Themis is sometimes simply law, the law established from above. She appears in Homer as Indo-Homeric hymns as the goddess of assemblies, of that which human beings establish, namely decision about the course of action, the choice between alternatives, and so on. Themis in the plural can mean oracles sometimes. And so Sarah Ives Johnston is asking, what does it mean that a single goddess watches over both human assemblies and oracular knowledge? So we tend to separate religion as a separate category and life as something else, but the overlap and the interwoven aspects of both religion and society are very different in the ancient Greek world. In the Byzantine Encyclopedia, the Suda, oh, sorry, we just read that. So we see here basically two types of oracular divination that depend a lot on accessibility, namely, how often can you come and ask the god a question? What did they use for drawing lots? It's not quite clear. Since Homer, we have a variety of objects for drawing lots. In the city where I live, Tel Aviv, it was founded in 1909 by drawing lots. I mean, there's a picture of people congregating on the beach, and they have white shells, seashells, and gray seashells. And the white seashell will be somebody's name, and the gray seashell will be a certain plot of land. And by drawing lots, you know what you got. You already paid, but you know what you got. And that's apparently a common technique, which I learned later from a real estate agent in some places in the world. The Greeks used beans, a very cheap thing. And we know that in the Athenian democracy, they used black and white beans for some sort of drawing lots. The Thessalians submitted to Delphi a bunch of beans with names of candidates written on them, and the one chosen by Apollo would become the king. Okay? The Aetolians may have chosen their archons like this, and famously, we'll come back to him, Cleisthenes the Athenian. When he founded the Athenian democracy, he rearranged Athens into 10 different tribes, and he needed a hero for each one of them. He came to Delphi, gave the Pythia 100 names. I assume it wasn't beans, because 100 names is quite heavy. And she chose 10 for him. These are selective lotteries. You use the lottery to select someone to a position, and this exists already in Homer. Who will fight the hero Hector of Troy? 7 Greek heroes gather together, they throw the lot into a helmet, and Aias picks up the winning lot. He will fight Hector. He doesn't yet, but anyway, this is what the lot is saying. Aside from the selection, there was in Delphi, and we know this from an inscription from the 4th century when the city-state of Skiathos is coming to ask a question, she charged a high price for the inquiry, but we don't hear the Pythia. We hear of Epifructo, which the excavator Amandri thinks is a dualis, namely an oracle by the 2 beings. Probably the yes and the no answer. Okay, so this is a fascinating inscription, and the yes or no answers are quite fascinating. Why beans? Well, I think they were simply cheap and usually look alike. But some people go further and speculate Pythagorean implications because beans are supposed to have souls, maybe. But we really don't know. Basically, it's a question of availability, cheap. There's no problem throwing them away after use and getting more. Okay. Hesuchios, a Greek grammarian from the 5th or the 6th centuries AD, defines fructos, namely bean, as a divining token, lot, torch, especially the fructos delphis, he says, is a lot, a kleros. At Olympia, the inquirers use lots for divination. We don't know much about that. It's a rare mention. So here you have a grammarian actually who knows his ancient literature, although he lives quite late for our purpose, using his knowledge to tell us exactly what were they doing with those beans. Now, you remember I mentioned the Thessalians. According to Plutarch, they selected their king by a lot of bean oracle. In his essay on brotherly love, he says, okay, I'm quoting, when the Thessalians sent some bean lots, the fructoi, to the oracle at Delphi to inquire by them who should be their king, his uncle stole in one lot privately in the name of Aleuas. So they gave, and somebody pushed in another bean with the name of Aleuas. The priestess answered from the oracle that Aleuas should be king. His father, being surprised, averred that there was never a bean lot, fructose, thrown in for Aleuas that he knew of. At last, all concluded that some mistake was committed in putting down the name, whereupon they sent again to inquire at the oracle, and the priestess, confirming his first words, answered, I mean the youth with the reddish hair whom Dame Archedike did bear. So now she's actually specifying the person. Thus, Aleuas by the oracle, through his uncle Cain's policy, declared king. So here's a story, a kind of an anecdotal story of how there's an official lottery. The Thessalians are going to the Pythia to select for them a king from a list that they gave her, and somebody else pushed another name into the list, and he was the one chosen. And so the first phase is kleromancy, namely the use of lots. The second rises to an inspired prophecy needed to confirm the first. See, so first there's a lottery, and they think it's too bizarre to be true. Then they turn to Delphi again, and now the Pythia reconfirms it, probably through inspired prophecy at this time. When Cleisthenes, as I mentioned before, gave a list of 100 archegetai, the fact that the Pythia could choose 10 of them meant that Apollo was giving his authority and sanction to the entire reform of Cleisthenes. Because we know that founders of cities and great reformers often turn to Delphi for sanction. And even tyrants did that because they wanted to appear like founders of cities and great reformers. And so Cleisthenes is I don't know how much you know about it, but it's such a complicated reform. This is really the true foundation of Athenian democracy at the end of the 6th century BC. There's never any mention of him going to Delphi except this one. But the division into 10 tribes, from which every year, by lot, 50 persons would go and compose the Athenian council, the bulle, chosen by lot. Cleisthenes starts this by lottery, by the fact that Apollo says, chooses those 10. Apollo authorized the entire framework of the Cleisthenic reforms. And the way they were so successful because he mixed the Athenian population, thus cutting through the Gordian knots of aristocratic influence in local areas. So suddenly the aristocrat was there and the person was here and different tribes, and the whole thing was a real mixture. Athens was very close to Delphi. It kept religious interpreters, exegetai. They were probably chosen by lot during the time of democracy in the classical period. And it is remarkable that the Delphic oracle itself was partly run by drawing lots. So the order of consultation with the Pythia was managed by drawing lots, as is further evidence also in the Eumenides. It also means that drawing lots was a method acceptable to all the Greeks. I have to draw this implication as an ancient historian because I don't know what happened in the 1035 Greek city-states that existed in the classical period. But the fact that at the Pan-Hellenic center, the principle of drawing lots in a religious institution was accepted to all the Greeks coming to Delphi means that it was a Pan-Hellenic convention and nomos. How you enter, here again from the Ion, and if there are any from among the Hellenists here, let them enter in turn by lot, as is the custom. Okay, so the order of asking questions of the Pythia is also by lot. The emphasis, as is the custom, and the relevant verbs in Greek leave no doubt that this is the case. In another play, the Ion by Euripides, the hero is an attendant at the temple of Delphi, so all Delphic information is significant. And, "O son of Leto, I invoke you, who sends forth your holy voice from the golden seat." This is what you read in the Loeb translation of the play Ion. But what the text really says, and this just goes to show you how modern scholars, even textual scholars, think so little of the lot, or think it's not rational, so they just avoid it and create translations that simply don't mention it. And this is one case. But what the text really says is, you, Apollo, who allot your oracles, klero, literally deliver an oracle by lots to those who come to your golden seat. So sometimes just a translation, here I'm saying this, when reading Greek translations, especially older ones, older translations, one might miss the lot entirely. As the following illustrates, about to enter the oracle, one character, Xutus, says, "Good, I have everything I need. I will go inside. For as I hear, the victim has been sacrificed for foreigners." Wonderful. If you're interested in Greek sacrifice, you go to this line. But the text doesn't say that. The text says, "For I hear the oracular lots have been cast." And the words are very explicit. For foreigners. So in a way, we are even hidden from approaching a major institution in classical antiquity through translations that are not very, very precise. So I'm sure people tell you always it's very important to learn the language of the civilization you're studying, otherwise you know nothing. Basically everything is just interpretation. And here you've just seen two examples of precisely that. Without ancient Greek, I would never have known that, just reading the translation. Okay, so that's very, very significant. In the play of, in the same play, Ion, he says, "I am outside, within it belongs to others seated near the tripod. Stranger, the best men of Delphi, chosen by lot." So the entire city-state of Delphi that was running the oracle, that was running the Pythian games, its officials are also chosen by lot. So there's a kind of the notion that randomness is good. It stabilizes things, it keeps things running smoothly and shortly. There's this the choice of priests of Delphi, according to a passage in Plutarch that sadly the text is corrupted. We don't exactly understand what he means, but he says something that you will not understand it either, but the meaning will be clear. On the 6th day of the new month, namely when the prophetic priest is conducted down to the Prytaneon, the first of your 3 sortitions is for 5, the casting 3 and you casting 2, each with reference to the other. Nobody understands what he's saying here. But clearly he's talking about drawing lots, okay? So that is what, and it takes place in the Prytaneon, in the political heart of the city. And let me finish just with, because time is running out, just with one story that illustrates the variety of aspects concerned with drawing lots and the position of Delphi accordingly. So at some point, the Athenians wanted permission to work the sacred lands at Eleusis, which was a major temple of Demeter in Attica. But you don't do that because there's an interdiction to do that. So you go to Delphi to ask the question. But drawing lots was not just a wonderful thing for selection, it was also a preventative measure against corruption, against cheating, against any bad intentions that are involved. So what do the Athenians do? They congregate. They ask a question, is it better and more good, which is the formula usually, to work the fields? Sorry. It is better and more good to work the fields. And this they write on one tin foil like this. They roll it up and they throw it into a hydria, into a jug of water. And then the other tin foil says, you shouldn't work the fields, the opposite of the first. And you roll it up and you throw it into the same jug of water. Now the priest put his hands in the jug of water, pulls out one of the lots, he doesn't know which one, and puts it into a golden vase. Then he dips his hand in the water, takes out the lot, and puts it into a silver vase. 15 Athenian citizens, chosen by lot, come and put the stamp on the vase and seal it up on the two vases, the golden one and the silver one. And they stick both vases in a cave and the Acropolis. And then they send a mission to Delphi to ask the god, should they follow the one in the silver or the one in the gold? Not knowing themselves what is in the silver and what is in the gold. It's a beautiful long inscription, very theatrical too. 4th century BC. And it's recounted as a story almost. And the delegation comes back and gives the verdict. So look how many double blinds there are here. The priest doesn't know in which vase he put which oracle. The delegation to Delphi has no idea. At Delphi, they don't know the question. They only know, should I follow the silver jug or the golden jug? There's a deep mistrust in the whole process. I mean, the whole process is in order to avoid the taint of corruption or suspicion. But the whole thing's taken very seriously. I mean, you don't inscribe anything in Athens. By the time you inscribe a pretty long inscription too. That is what you do. So let me finish here. But I hope I tried to succeed in giving you a sort of a spectrum of vision of the god Apollo, the god of prophecy, what it meant, what it related to, who came to Delphi, why did he go to Delphi, and in short, providing Delphi itself with an image of an ongoing, constant oracle that was open more than one day a month for prophecy, that allowed popular types of consultation by the oracle. But the point is, if we didn't have that inscription, and an ancient source would simply say, the Athenians went to Delphi, they asked, could they work the sacred field? The god said yes. We would have assumed they spoke to the Pythia. But they didn't. They went to a lot oracle. And we only know it because we have somebody describing the process. Because the moment the Lot oracle works, it is as if Apollo has spoken. It has the authority of Apollo. And that is the new dimension that I hope this research of mine has exposed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Malkin, for this wonderful talk. I'm sure that there will be questions, comments, so please feel entirely free to raise your hand. Please, and if you can perhaps say your name, it's a way of introduction to Professor Malkin.
Okay, so I don't use a microphone, right? I just speak.
Well,
You should.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Malkin. Lovely talk. Short comment and short question, if I may. So I was very struck when you gave the examples of modern translators just completely omitting sortition, drawing lots. And you said something to the effect that for most modern scholars, the notion of drawing lots seems so irrational that we tend to, neglect it or hide it altogether. This is going to surprise you, but I was reminded by something from Max Weber about the thesis of the disenchantment of the world, because precisely for most of modern worldviews, let's say, the world is no longer habitated by gods, let's say, and so all these notions that somehow strip the human of its responsibility to know the world and take decisions by human powers alone no longer seems rational. Now, elaborating on the question, you, on the other hand, more or less indirectly mentioned some of the consequences or advantages, or even the, hidden rationality of drawing lots. One of the things you said is that if we lift the burden of difficult choices from human powers and we somehow, place them beyond human capabilities and outsource them to gods, then that, alleviates tensions, social tensions, etc. So picking up on that, I would just only like to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit further on that, somehow that rationality behind drawing lots and its significance for a cultural world and a worldview so distant from ours, such as that of the ancient Greeks. I know it's short to formulate, difficult to answer, but yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to be brief because there isn't much time. I just the other day looked at the article by Gustav Glotz from 1922. He was a great admirer of the ancient Greeks, and he wrote a very good book on the Greek polis. But he says, I don't understand this. Everything is fine among the Greeks, but this, they probably just wanted to know the will of the gods. As if every time, and I think 6,000 judges in Athens were chosen every year by lot, as if for each one of them, certain god made a decision. No, didn't seem right to me at all. And so the question is, are the gods responsible for every throw of the dice, which also bothered Christian thinkers like Gataker in the 16th century, said God is not capricious, that's impossible. Unlike Einstein. So the question of rationality is very significant. But you look at the work of the great Jean-Pierre Vernant, La Cité des Raisons, the city of reason, where persuasion, where logic work. This is an idealization of ancient Athens. And drawing lots is simply outside, his vision is blinkered, it's not there. And the point to remember is that Greeks made a rational decision to use a random device to operate the city-state. So, and that's a rational decision to use a random device, because randomness, and by the way, you said I didn't mean that they tried to relegate the decision to a god. On the contrary, not to a god, to something completely neutral. Following the decision it makes, there's no resentment, the way to do it, and it creates stability. It creates social cohesion. It creates, in the Athenian democracy, it functioned truly as a koinonia, namely as a partnership of everyone. Because the notion about kleros is you get a portion of what is common to everyone. So no, I think modern scholarship has simply avoided the issue because either they solved it simplistically as saying, okay, it's the will of the gods, as if the Greeks were living in a forest of determinism. Every moment they tried to know what the gods want for them. There was even a novel called The Dice Man, published in the 1970s, where the hero makes all his major decisions by throwing lots. But he's also formulating the question, so it's not so, it doesn't work too well. I see that another question, so I want to leave. We only have 5 minutes, so.
Oh, thank you for your wonderful lecture on dice and lottery. I just, well, as a philosopher, we are always looking for what does it mean. And I remember Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The Lottery in Babylon.
Yeah.
And that's precisely a description of the meaning of lotteries. And then in the end, perhaps, so putting lots or playing lots is just the same thing as consulting the cosmic order. So in some sense, lots are just the chances, and as Borges shows, well, in the end, since everything was determined by lots in the life of man, then, well, the lot was confounded, was the same thing as the natural order of things. In some sense, well, the decisions were taken by the natural order of things, by the universe. And so life is normally determined by chance and randomness. And so that was a very rational decision, of course, enveloped in religious thought or mythological thought, but in some sense a kind of rationality that obeys to the cosmic order of random and chance. That was
I am a little difficulty understanding how a cosmic order makes decisions. It's more, what you're saying is almost the reverse, namely the lottery adjusts us to the cosmic order. This is basically the direction of thinking. An interesting thought. Yeah, I should take it into consideration.
More questions?
Over here.
Thank you for your marvelous lecture, and it was for me, quite completely different mindset. I only was aware of these questions of lots considering Athenian democracy, of course, that randomness of course, the old functioning of Athenian democracy. But I want to ask you two things, because I work with them in my classes, and I am not aware for the moment. Of course, I could see in the texts, but for the moment, I never noticed or I never looked at that texts considering this particular mindset you presented us. Well, I'm talking about Hesiod's theogony, the moment when the gods divide Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. They divide their power over the world, the sky for one, the underground for the other, and the sea. And also in Hesiod, the fifth myth age. Each age finishes with the consideration of what is given to each age. Well, some of them received to consider they are presented, or they are considered genius. The other ones go this or that. At this moment, do you, since you studied these matters, is there a language connection to this matter?
Yes, there is.
Lots.
The thing to remember, in fact, the scene in book 15 in the Iliad, where you get the best description of how the three gods are dividing the world by lot, almost proves that Greeks didn't think that the gods were determining the result of lotteries. Because if the gods themselves are using the lot to get Poseidon the sea and Hades the underworld and Zeus the sky, they're not asking another god to reveal his will to them. They are the gods. And of course, the whole point is that the whole scene is a human projection, of course. So, which means it's a human value. We read it about Poseidon, but we know it's a human being who had this idea. So in short, if the gods are doing a lottery, they're not doing it to reveal the will of the gods. that's very simple. And I think this argument runs all the way through. Whenever people turn to the simplistic answer of why Greeks used the god, they wanted to know what the gods were thinking. No. Like any public ceremony, they were all under the auspices of the gods. But it doesn't mean that the gods were the ones making the decision. In Hesiod, Zeus is elected by the gods to become king. It's a different dimension from his time or his province, namely the sky, which he got by lot. He is a king by a political decision of the gods. He is the owner of the sky, just as Poseidon is the owner of the depth, he's Gaios, and the sea, because of the lottery. So this is the distinction I think we should make. Okay.
Final question, there is one.
Thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting. My question is, if the gods don't decide the result of the lots, in what way does, let's say, Apollo's authority sort of descend upon the result of the lot and gives it legitimacy?
Sorry, if it's my fault. I should have made that clearer. In the book, mentioned by Professor Liao, there's a whole variety of chapters where I'm saying that divination is the only place where Greeks were using lots to divine the will of the gods. But this is self-consciously done, and this is distinct from any other action done with the lots. I should have made that much clearer. No, clearly, you can't come out of this lecture thinking, oh, Apollo didn't reveal this. No, he did. But this is quite a unique domain where this kind of thing was happening. And Delphi is interesting because, as you see, it's not just the prophecies, but the entire institution is run by lot. From the selection of the Pythia to the selection of the priests and to the selection of the political magistrates in the city, and to the working of the oracle itself, the Promantea, who comes first to prophesy. So the lot is there in many, many aspects, aside from divination. But divination, of course, is the biggest. That's why I have a specific chapter just in that.
Thank you very much indeed. It was a great lecture, so I hope that we can continue dialogue with Professor Malkin. Just you have to send him an email or come up and in the classical class studies institute, and they schedule with a talk with him or coffee will be available for them.
Very welcome.
Very, very, very much generous, and it's always a pleasure. The next talk will be precisely within 15 days, within 2 weeks, the 18th of November. Professor Malkin will speak about ancient Sparta between myth and history. Another topic that he knows very well and a fascinating topic as well. It will be at 6 p.m. So thank you very much, and let us once again.
Thank you very much.